Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we dive into today's case, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Now let's get into the story. I should have turned back the moment I stepped onto that trail, but like a lot of bad decisions, it didn't feel wrong until it was too late. The wind whispered through the trees as I stood at the trailhead, taking in the sight of the forest before me. Northern Montana was known for its beauty, its sprawling wilderness that felt untouched by time or man. I'd been on countless hikes before, but there was something different about this one. The air was heavy, thick with the earthy smell of pine and wet moss. The trees rose like silent sentinels, ancient and gnarled, casting long shadows across the narrow path that stretched ahead. I adjusted my backpack, shifting the weight on my shoulders. The thought crossed my mind that maybe this was too much for a solo hike, but it was just a flicker. I was alone. That was the point. I took a deep breath and started forward, the trail crunching under my boots. The silence was almost unsettling. No birds, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, just the soft creak of trees swaying in the wind. A perfect day for solitude, or so I thought. About an hour into the hike, the landscape began to close in. The forest was thick, dense with trees that seemed to press in on me, their branches stretching out like fingers, weaving together a canopy that blotted out the sun. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. It felt unnatural, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I paused, wiping sweat from my forehead, and glanced back. The trailhead was long out of sight, swallowed by the forest behind me. For the first time that day, I felt a knot of unease in my stomach. I shook it off, telling myself I'd just gotten spooked by the quiet. Nothing out here but deer, bears, and the occasional hiker, right? I pressed on, trying to shake the growing feeling that I was being watched. Every few minutes, I'd hear a faint rustle, but when I turned to look, there was nothing but trees and shadows. Relax, I told myself. You've been out here 100 times before. No need to freak out now, but I couldn't shake it. I was about 2 miles in when I first heard it, a crunch, like someone stepping on dry leaves behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned, my breath catching in my throat. The trail behind me was empty. "Hello!" My voice cracked the silence, sounding small and weak. There was no reply, just the faint whisper of wind in the treetops. I stood there for a long moment, scanning the woods, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the forest remained still, as if nothing had stirred at all. Finally, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Get a grip, Jason," I muttered under my breath, shaking my head. You're jumping at shadows, still. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was stupid. Maybe some other hiker was on the trail, and I hadn't noticed them. Or maybe a deer had wandered off. But that knot of unease was still there, twisting tighter. The trail became steeper as I pressed forward, climbing up a series of rocky switchbacks. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows that stretched out like dark fingers across the forest floor. The light was fading faster than I expected. By the time I reached a small clearing near a stream, I knew I had to set up camp. The trail ahead wound deeper into the mountains, and I wasn't about to navigate it in the dark. I found a flat patch of earth near the water, dropped my pack, and started setting up my tent. The silence felt oppressive now, the quiet only broken by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. As I worked, the feeling of being watched came back stronger than before. I stopped, mid-motion, and looked around again. The woods around the clearing were dense, the trees standing tall and close together, their shadows long and dark. But there was nothing there. No movement. No sound. Still, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I forced myself to keep moving, setting up my tent and gathering firewood. When I finally got a small fire going, I sat down on a log and tried to relax, but my eyes kept flicking to the tree line, scanning for what? I didn't know. Just something. The sky was darkening fast, stars just beginning to wink into existence overhead. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow around the clearing, but beyond that circle of light, the woods seemed impenetrable, like a wall of shadows. I tried to eat, but my appetite was gone. I kept hearing things, faint rustlings, distant cracks of branches, but every time I strained to listen, it stopped. My hand instinctively went to my knife, resting at my hip. I didn't know why, but the weight of it felt comforting. Then I heard it again. A crunch, much louder this time, closer. I froze, my eyes fixed on the edge of the clearing. The fire crackled, but the sound was drowned out by the thudding of my own heartbeat. Slowly, I rose from the log, my muscles tense, my hand gripping the handle of my knife. "Who's there?" I called, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. There was no answer, just the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. I took a step closer to the edge of the clearing, my eyes straining to see beyond the firelight. The trees were a wall of black, their branches shifting slightly in the wind. I was about to turn back when I saw it, a shape, just barely visible in the shadows, too tall and too wide to be anything normal. It was there, and then it wasn't, slipping back into the darkness like it had never been there at all. My breath caught in my throat, my hand gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles went white. I took a step back, stumbling slightly over the log behind me. I spun, scanning the trees around the clearing, but the shape was gone. I hurried back to the fire, throwing another log on to keep the flames high. I didn't know what I'd seen, but it wasn't normal. And whatever it wasn't far. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, knife in hand, staring into the darkness, waiting for whatever was out there to come back. The woods had gone silent again, and for the first time in my life, I realized how alone I really was. The next morning, the forest felt different. There was a sharpness to the air, the kind that makes your skin prickle with the first cold breath of winter. I had barely slept, maybe caught a few restless hours here and there, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the hulking shape I'd seen the night before, lurking just beyond the firelight. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching me. I doused the last of the embers from my campfire and packed up quickly, wanting to put some distance between me and the clearing. The woods had gone back to their usual quiet, but it didn't feel right. It felt forced, like something was holding everything in place. Even the birds seemed silent, like they knew better than to make noise. I adjusted my pack and started back on the trail, the crunch of my boots on the dirt the only sound I could hear. The air was crisp and biting as the sun began to rise higher in the sky, but there was no warmth in it. The shadows between the trees seemed darker, longer. A few miles down the trail, I stopped by a stream to refill my water bottle. I knelt by the bank, splashing cold water on my face, trying to clear my head. That's when I saw them, tracks, pressed deep into the soft mud. My stomach twisted as I stared at them. They were huge. At first, I thought they were bear tracks, but no, they were too wide, too human-like. I swallowed hard, tracing the outline of the footprint with my finger. It had to be a joke, right? Some hiker messing around. But the tracks didn't look fresh. They looked old, like they had been made during the night. I stood up, my eyes scanning the area, searching for some explanation, but the trail was empty. The forest was still. The tracks led back into the trees, veering off the main path and disappearing into the dense brush. I debated following them, but quickly thought better of it. The last thing I needed was to get lost out here. Still, the size of them gnawed at me. I'd seen bear prints before. These weren't bear tracks. They couldn't be. I stepped back from the stream, suddenly uneasy, and continued along the trail. As I walked, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. It was like something was moving with me, just out of sight, slipping between the trees and the shadows. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me like a cold sweat. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees crowding together, their branches blocking out the sun. The trail ahead seemed to stretch forever, a narrow, winding path that led deeper into the wilderness. The further I went, the harder it was to breathe, like the air itself was thickening. About an hour later, I found another sign. I almost missed it at first, a patch of disturbed earth just off the trail, hidden beneath a tangle of ferns and brush. But when I moved closer, I saw what it was, a deer carcass, torn apart like it had been savaged by something big. Its body was a mess of blood and fur, the limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Most of the flesh had been ripped away, exposing bone and sinew. The stench hit me, thick and putrid, and I gagged, taking a step back. This wasn't just a normal predator kill. It was brutal, excessive. The kind of violence that made your skin crawl. I crouched down, my heart pounding in my chest. There were more of those huge footprints in the dirt around the body, pressed deep into the ground. Whatever had done this, it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't human either. I stood up quickly, wiping my palms on my pants, my mind racing. The wind shifted, bringing with it a thick, musky scent, like wet fur mixed with decay. It hung in the air, clinging to everything. I scanned the trees, my hand instinctively going to the knife at my side. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound. "Calm down, Jason," I muttered to myself. "It's just an animal. A big one, sure, but nothing you can't handle." I didn't believe my own words. Something wasn't right out here. The whole forest felt off, like I was walking into some kind of trap. I moved on, quickening my pace. The trail wound upward, the terrain getting rockier as I climbed, but the feeling of being followed wouldn't leave me. Every few minutes, I'd hear something, branches snapping, leaves rustling, but when I looked back, the trail was always empty. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift, as though something large was moving just out of sight. It wasn't just paranoia. Something was following me. I could feel it. I stopped again, my heart hammering in my chest, and strained to listen. At first, there was only silence. Then I heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps, mirroring my own. I whipped around, my pulse quickening. The trail behind me was empty, but the sound was unmistakable. Heavy, measured, as if something was stalking me from the shadows. I took a step back, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Another hiker? A bear? But deep down, I knew the truth. It was the same thing that had left those tracks by the stream, the same thing that had torn apart that deer. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky and weak. No answer, just the wind whispering through the trees. I started moving again, faster this time, almost at a jog, my eyes darting from side to side. Every step I took was echoed by that slow, deliberate crunch behind me, always keeping pace. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was just my imagination, but it was no use. The sun was beginning to dip lower, casting long shadows across the trail. I had to find a place to stop, to set up camp before it got dark. But the idea of stopping, of staying in one place while that _thing_ was out there, made my skin crawl. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I spotted a ridge ahead, a narrow clearing that overlooked the valley below. I scrambled up the slope, my legs burning, and collapsed at the top, gasping for breath. The forest below stretched out endlessly, a sea of trees and shadows. I sat there for a long moment, trying to calm myself, trying to think. The footsteps had stopped, but I knew it was still out there, waiting, watching. As I reached for my water bottle, something caught my eye. Across the clearing, partially obscured by a thick grove of trees, was another track. Deep, wide, and unmistakable. It was bigger than the others. Much bigger. I stood up, my heart pounding, and backed away from the edge of the clearing. The musky scent returned, stronger this time, hanging in the air like a warning. Whatever had made those tracks, whatever had killed that deer, it was close. Too close. And it wasn't going to stop. By the time the sun dipped below the mountains, I was more than uneasy. I was terrified. The shadows stretched long and dark across the trail, twisting like black tendrils across the ground. My heart pounded in my chest, a steady thrum that drowned out the rhythmic crunch of my boots on the dirt. I hadn't heard the footsteps behind me for a while now, but that didn't mean whatever it was had gone. I could feel it, lurking just beyond the edge of the tree line, hidden in the darkness. I kept moving, faster now, desperate to find a place to camp for the night. The fading daylight wouldn't last much longer, and I couldn't afford to be out here when it got fully dark. My mind raced with thoughts of the massive tracks, the torn-apart deer, the musky smell that clung to everything like decay. The trail had leveled out as I moved higher into the foothills. Rocky outcroppings jutted out on either side, making the path narrow. My eyes flicked to the trees every few seconds, scanning for any movement, any hint of that thing I knew was out there. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, so deep I could feel it vibrating in my bones, echoed through the forest. It was close, too close. I froze mid-step, my breath caught in my throat. The growl was unlike anything I'd ever heard, primal and full of malice. Slowly, I turned in the direction of the sound. At first, I saw nothing, just the trees swaying gently in the breeze. But then I spotted it, a massive, hulking figure partially hidden behind the trunk of a pine. It was barely visible, only a shadow in the fading light, but the size of it, the thing was enormous. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the hilt of my knife. My entire body was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The thing didn't move either, just stood there, half in shadow, watching. Its eyes caught the last of the dying sunlight, glowing with an unnatural yellowish hue. They were fixed on me, unblinking, and filled with something dark, something _wrong _. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Could it be a bear? A trick of the light? No, it was something else entirely. The air was thick with the stench of wet fur and rotting flesh. The wind shifted, and the smell hit me full force, nearly knocking me over. I gagged, my stomach lurching, but I didn't dare look away from the creature. I was afraid that if I did, it would be on me in an instant. Then it moved. The thing stepped forward, its massive frame emerging from the shadows, and I saw it clearly for the first time. It towered over me, at least 8 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur. Its shoulders were broad, arms longer than a man's, with fingers that ended in thick, black claws. Its face! God, its face was the stuff of nightmares. It looked almost human, but the jaw was too wide, the mouth too full of jagged teeth. Its eyes burned with an intelligence that sent ice down my spine. This thing knew what it was doing. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't just hungry. It wanted to kill me. I took a step back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The thing let out another growl, louder this time, shaking the air around me. It crouched low, muscles tensing beneath its fur, ready to spring. "Stay back!" I shouted, raising the knife in front of me, though I knew it was a pointless gesture. There was no way that small blade would do anything against something this size. The thing tilted its head slightly, like it was studying me, then let out a snarl that reverberated through the forest. In a flash, it moved, faster than anything that size had a right to. 1 second it was a few yards away, and the next it was charging straight at me, its claws outstretched. "Shit!" I yelled, turning on my heel and running. I don't know how I managed to stay on my feet. The ground was uneven, the trail slick with fallen leaves and damp earth, but pure terror kept me upright. I could hear it behind me, the thunderous pounding of its feet, getting closer with every second. I didn't dare look back. Branches tore at my face and arms as I sprinted through the forest, but I didn't feel them. All I could focus on was the sound of the creature gaining on me, its growls turning into something more like a roar, like it was hunting me and enjoying it. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. There was a fallen log up ahead, and I vaulted over it without thinking, hitting the ground hard on the other side. I rolled, scrambled to my feet, and kept running. I could feel it now, its breath hot and rancid, so close it felt like it was right on top of me. I was going to die. I knew it. This thing was going to catch me, tear me apart, and no one would ever find me out here in the middle of nowhere. Then it happened. I felt its claws graze the back of my neck, a sharp, burning pain that made me cry out. But before I could process it, something heavy slammed into me from behind, sending me flying forward. My vision went white with pain as I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I tried to get up, tried to crawl away, but my body wouldn't respond. Everything was numb, my vision blurry. I could hear the thing moving around me, its heavy breathing filling my ears. I was going to die. Then, just as quickly as it had attacked, the thing stopped. I could hear it breathing, could feel its presence looming over me, but it didn't strike again. Instead, there was a long, excruciating pause. I felt something hot on the back of my neck, like breath, its breath. It leaned in close, so close I could smell the rotting stench of its mouth, and then everything went dark. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the pain. My whole body ached, especially my neck and shoulders. I blinked, groaning as I tried to move, my muscles stiff and uncooperative. The second thing I noticed was the time. It was pitch black now. Hours must have passed. My fire was out, and the forest was deathly quiet. Too quiet. I gingerly reached up and touched the back of my neck. My fingers came away wet and sticky with blood. There were scratches, deep ones, but nothing fatal. I should have been dead. The creature, why hadn't it killed me? I staggered to my feet, disoriented and in shock. My gear was scattered around, my pack slashed open, but most of it was still there. My knife was on the ground beside me, useless as it had been before. I looked around, scanning the darkness for any sign of the creature, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence of the forest. It was gone, but I wasn't safe. Not yet. I woke up slowly, disoriented. My body felt heavy, and everything around me was still. For a few moments, I wasn't sure where I was, or why the cold dirt beneath me felt so hard. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, the forest's familiar scent wrapping around me. But something was wrong. The pain hit me in jagged waves, making it hard to breathe. I blinked, my vision blurry, as the memories started flooding back. The hike, the attack, underscore that thing underscore. My heart raced as flashes of yellow eyes and claws played in my mind, and the memory of its breath, hot and rancid, on my neck made me shudder. I groaned, reaching up to touch my neck. My fingers brushed over deep, burning scratches. Blood. Not much, but enough to make me wince. The skin around the wounds throbbed. Whatever had attacked me had left its mark, but it hadn't killed me. Why? Why didn't it kill me? I sat up slowly, my muscles stiff and aching. The world swayed for a moment, and I realized with growing dread that I had no idea how much time had passed. Hours, maybe? It was dark now, pitch black, except for the faint glow of the moon peeking through the canopy above. My fire had long since gone out, leaving only the faint, smoky smell of charred wood behind. Everything was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam weak and flickering. I swept it around the clearing, searching for any sign of movement, any hint that the thing was still out there. The woods looked the same, dark, dense, and full of shadows, but something felt off. The silence was oppressive, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I couldn't even hear the usual sounds of crickets or wind rustling the branches. Just nothing. I stood, wobbling on my feet, and tried to gather myself. My gear was scattered around me, my tent shredded to pieces. My backpack lay a few feet away, the fabric slashed open, its contents spilled across the dirt. Panic surged in my chest. My food was gone. The little emergency kit I had? Destroyed. What the hell? I muttered under my breath, my voice trembling. Why hadn't it killed me? I crouched down and grabbed what I could, my knife, the flashlight, the half-full water bottle. Everything else was useless now. My clothes were torn, blood-stained, and my body felt like it had been run over by a freight train. But I was alive. Barely. I scanned the trees again, heart pounding, waiting for the creature to come back. It had to be watching me, right? It couldn't just vanish. I had felt it. It was breathing down my neck. So why leave me alive? A cold chill crept up my spine as a new thought wormed its way into my mind. Was it playing with me? Suddenly, the sound of a branch snapping in the distance broke the silence. My entire body tensed. I spun toward the noise, gripping the knife with white-knuckled fingers, my flashlight sweeping through the trees. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice louder than I intended. The forest swallowed my words, offering no response. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. More rustling. Closer this time. "I know you're out there." My voice cracked. My legs felt like they could give out at any moment, but I stood my ground, desperately trying to keep the beam of my flashlight steady. Then nothing. Just the dark. The trees loomed large, their branches twisting like black tendrils into the night sky. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the faintest scent of something familiar. Something musky and foul, like wet fur mixed with decay. I backed away slowly, my foot catching on the remains of my tent, nearly sending me sprawling. My flashlight flickered again, the beam growing weaker. "Damn it!" I cursed, shaking it in a futile attempt to get more light. Click, the light went out completely, leaving me standing in the black void of the forest. I froze, terror clutching at my throat. My only source of light gone. I fumbled to pull my phone from my pocket, my hands trembling, but it was dead too. A wave of nausea rolled over me as I realized just how utterly alone I was. In the darkness, that thing could be anywhere. Watching. Waiting. I swallowed hard, trying to force down the rising panic. I couldn't stay here. Not out in the open, not with my tent destroyed and the fire gone. My best chance was to move, to get away from this cursed clearing, find a safer place to hunker down until dawn. If I could even make it that long. I turned and started down the trail, moving as fast as my battered body would allow. Every step sent a jolt of pain through my limbs, but adrenaline kept me moving. My eyes struggled to adjust to the dark, the faint moonlight offering little guidance. The trees seemed to close in tighter around me, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the sky. As I moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something just out of sight, hidden in the shadows. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent my heart into overdrive. The air felt heavier now, thicker, as if the very forest was conspiring to trap me. I kept my knife in front of me, though I knew it wouldn't do much against whatever was out there. But holding it made me feel like I had some control, even if it was just an illusion. A few minutes later, I stumbled to a stop, gasping for breath. My legs were shaking, and I leaned against a tree, trying to calm my racing heart. I could still hear the faint rustling behind me, that steady sound of something moving through the forest, keeping pace with me. Suddenly, I heard another snap, this time much closer. My pulse spiked, and I spun around, my eyes frantically searching the darkness. That's when I saw them, two glowing eyes watching me from the shadows, the same eyes I'd seen before. They hovered just above the underbrush, impossibly large, and filled with something cold, something that sent a shiver of primal fear down my spine. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. The thing didn't move, just watched me with those terrible, glowing eyes. It was as if it was daring me to run, waiting for the moment when I'd break and sprint, so it could give chase. My knees buckled, but I caught myself. No, not this time. Go away, I whispered, my voice shaking, but filled with as much force as I could muster. Just leave me alone. The eyes blinked, but the thing didn't move. I gripped the knife tighter, but I knew there was no point in fighting. It could take me down in seconds, but for some reason it didn't. It just stared. Then slowly, it backed away into the trees, the glowing eyes fading into the shadows. I stood there, shaking, too terrified to move. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. I didn't think. I just stood there in the dark, waiting for it to return. But it didn't. I was alone again. And this time, I knew it wouldn't be for long. The night wasn't over. I couldn't stop moving. Not after what I'd seen. Not after those eyes, yellow glowing, full of something far beyond hunger, had locked onto mine. My legs felt weak beneath me, the adrenaline ebbing, replaced by exhaustion, but I forced myself to keep walking. Every step I took seemed too loud, as if the crunch of twigs and leaves under my boots would call the thing back. The forest closed in tighter the deeper I went, the trees standing like tall, silent sentinels watching. Every few steps, I would hear something, a distant rustle, the snap of a branch, but when I stopped to listen, the silence would rush back in like a suffocating blanket. I knew I wasn't alone. I had to keep moving. But where? The trail seemed to vanish beneath my feet, the familiar path twisted into something unrecognizable. My flashlight was long dead, and the moonlight was faint, filtering through the thick canopy of branches overhead, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Those shadows seemed to shift as I moved, playing tricks on my eyes, making me jump at every flicker. As I climbed over a fallen log, I felt a sharp pain in my side. I winced, touching the spot where the creature had grazed me. My fingers came away sticky with dried blood. It wasn't deep, but the wound burned like fire. Every breath was a reminder of how close it had come, how it could have killed me, but didn't. Why didn't it kill me? The thought haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Was it toying with me? Was this some kind of sick game? I had no answers, only a gnawing fear that grew worse with every passing minute. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath, leaning against the rough bark of a pine tree. My chest heaved as I tried to calm myself, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how far I went, it was always there, just behind me, just out of sight. Watching, waiting. A sharp crack echoed through the forest, and my heart leaped into my throat. I whipped around, gripping my knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. But there was nothing, just the endless stretch of trees, their twisted branches forming a labyrinth of shadows. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, a deer maybe, or a raccoon. But I knew better. I'd heard animals before. This was something else, something bigger, something that shouldn't be here. My hand shook as I reached for my water bottle, unscrewing the cap and taking a long, shaky gulp. The water was cold, but it did nothing to calm the tightness in my chest. I needed to get out of here. Now. I needed to find the trail again, head back to the ranger station, and report what had happened. But the trail was gone. I started walking again, trying to stay focused, but the woods felt like a maze, each turn looking the same as the last. My mind was fraying at the edges, the fear creeping in, making it harder to think clearly. The sense of being followed was relentless, like a weight pressing down on my shoulders. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves, felt like a warning. I didn't even realize I was crying until I tasted the salt on my lips. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, furious at myself for letting fear take over. "Come on, Jason," I whispered to myself, trying to sound braver than I felt. "You can't break down. Not now." But deep down, I knew I was breaking. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the woods as fast as I could. But where could I go? There was no escape, no clear path back. The thing had herded me deeper into the forest, away from the trail, away from safety. And then I heard it, the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and impossibly heavy. Not far off, just beyond the line of trees to my right. My blood went cold as I realized they were getting closer. It wasn't a bear or a deer. It was him, the creature. The footsteps stopped, and the woods fell silent again. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my back despite the cool air. I didn't dare move. I didn't even blink. Seconds passed, then minutes. The silence dragged on, and I prayed that maybe, just maybe, it had gone. But deep down, I knew it hadn't. The air shifted, and that sickening, musky smell returned, the same stench I had smelled the night before. The same stench that clung to the shredded deer carcass. It was close. Too close. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Come on, I whispered, willing my legs to move, but they felt frozen, rooted to the spot. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't outrun it. I had tried, and it had caught me. Suddenly, something moved in the trees ahead of me. A massive, shadowy figure stepped into view, barely visible in the faint moonlight. My heart stopped. It was the creature, standing tall, its hulking frame partially obscured by the branches. Its eyes glowed faintly, like two burning coals, locked onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I was too scared to even breathe. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if studying me, like it was deciding what to do next. Then it took a step forward, its massive foot crushing the leaves beneath it. I bolted. I didn't think, didn't look back, I just ran. My legs pumped harder than they ever had, the branches slashing at my face and arms as I sprinted through the woods. My lungs burned with the effort, but I didn't care. I had to get away. I had to survive. The footsteps thundered behind me, growing louder and faster. The creature was chasing me now, its growls filling the air, echoing through the trees. It was playing with me, like a cat playing with a mouse, letting me think I had a chance before closing in for the kill. I couldn't keep running. My legs were giving out, my breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, and I went down hard, hitting the ground with a painful thud. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. I could hear the creature closing in, its growls deep and menacing, its massive form crashing through the underbrush. I backed up against a tree, my knife held out in front of me, though I knew it was useless. The creature emerged from the trees, its eyes glowing in the dark, its breath hot and foul in the cold night air. It was right in front of me now, towering over me, its claws extended, ready to strike. I braced myself for the end, but once again it didn't come. The creature stood there, breathing heavily, its eyes locked on mine. For a moment, time seemed to stretch out, the forest silent except for the sound of our breathing. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it turned and vanished into the trees, disappearing into the darkness without a sound. I collapsed to the ground, shaking, my mind unable to process what had just happened. I had escaped again, but for how long? I was trapped in the woods with a monster, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. I had no idea how long I sat there, trembling, back pressed against the rough bark of the tree, my legs refusing to work. My chest was heaving, each breath feeling like a knife to my lungs. My mind raced with wild, panicked thoughts, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why hadn't it killed me? Twice now, that thing had me dead to rights. It could have ripped me apart easily. Yet, it didn't. It was like it was testing me, toying with me. My eyes darted through the darkness, half expecting to see the creature's glowing eyes staring back at me from the shadows. But there was only the endless blackness of the forest. No sound, no movement. The night air was cold against my skin, but the sweat soaking my clothes made me shiver even more. I forced myself to move, to stand. My body screamed in protest as I pushed myself to my feet. My knees wobbled, weak and battered from the fall, but I had no choice. I couldn't just sit here, waiting for it to come back. I had to keep going. My knife was still in my hand, though I barely remembered holding onto it. I looked down at the blade, at how pitiful it seemed compared to the massive creature I'd seen. It was laughable to think that this small piece of metal could protect me. Still, I gripped it tighter. It was the only thing I had. The trail was gone, swallowed by the forest. I wasn't even sure which direction I was headed anymore. I just knew I had to keep moving, had to keep putting distance between me and that thing. My legs felt like lead, every step a struggle, but I pushed forward. Each step was accompanied by a stabbing pain in my side where the creature had grazed me. The wound was shallow, but it burned like fire. I stumbled through the trees, the underbrush clawing at my legs, the branches reaching out to snag my clothes like skeletal hands. The darkness seemed to close in around me, pressing down on me from all sides. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above, and I had long since given up on using my dead flashlight. Suddenly I heard it again, the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, each one sending a wave of terror through my body. It was back. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The footsteps were slow this time, almost measured, like it was taking its time, savoring the chase. My breath caught in my throat, and I gripped the knife so tightly that my hand ached. The sound of branches snapping, closer now. My pulse raced. I had to move, had to get away, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. I could feel the weight of the creature's presence, could hear the deep, guttural breathing just beyond the trees. I took a slow, shaky step backward, my heart pounding in my ears. Another step, then another. I was about to turn and run when I heard something behind me, another snap of a branch. My stomach dropped. It's circling me, my breath hitched in my throat as I realized what was happening. It was smarter than I had given it credit for. It wasn't just a mindless monster. It was hunting me. It was hurting me. I spun around, desperate to find a way out, but I was surrounded by thick trees and underbrush. My mind raced as I searched for a way to escape, but the footsteps were everywhere now, coming from all directions, closing in on me. Panic surged through me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just ran. I didn't care where I was going. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just ran as fast as I could, crashing through the underbrush, branches slashing at my face and arms. The footsteps pounded behind me, growing louder, faster. It was coming for me. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, my legs screaming in protest. The terrain grew steeper, rockier, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I knew that if I stopped, if I even hesitated, it would be over. Up ahead, I saw a ridge, a steep incline covered in jagged rocks and loose dirt. It was my only chance. I scrambled up the ridge, my hands clawing at the dirt, my feet slipping on the loose rocks. The creature's growls echoed through the forest, growing closer by the second. I reached the top of the ridge and stumbled forward, collapsing onto the rocky ground. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, my body trembling with exhaustion. But I didn't have time to rest. The creature was at the base of the ridge now, its glowing eyes staring up at me through the darkness. For the first time, I saw it clearly, its full, terrifying form. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in thick, matted fur. Its arms were long and muscular, ending in hands that looked disturbingly human, except for the claws, thick, black, and sharp as knives. Its face! God, its face! It was almost human, but twisted into something monstrous. Its jaw was too wide, filled with jagged, yellow teeth, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence that sent ice through my veins. It let out a deep, guttural growl, and then it began to climb. I scrambled to my feet, backing away as it scaled the ridge with terrifying speed. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew I couldn't outrun it this time. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. This was it. I gripped the knife in both hands, my entire body shaking. I had no plan, no idea how I was going to survive this. But I wasn't going to die without a fight. The creature reached the top of the ridge and stood there for a moment, its eyes locked on mine. It let out a low, rumbling growl, and then it lunged. I swung the knife wildly, the blade glancing off its thick hide. It barely flinched. The force of its charge sent me sprawling backward, the knife slipping from my hand as I hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my body, but I ignored it, scrambling to my feet, desperate to find the knife. The creature was on me in an instant, its massive hand closing around my leg, dragging me toward it. I screamed, kicking and thrashing, but its grip was like iron. Its eyes burned with a cold, calculating malice as it leaned down, its breath hot and rancid on my face. I grabbed a rock from the ground and swung it with all my strength, hitting the creature in the side of the head. It let out a furious snarl, its grip loosening just enough for me to pull free. I stumbled back, grabbing the knife from the ground, but before I could strike, the creature turned and bounded back down the ridge, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. I stood there, panting, shaking, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The creature was gone. I had survived, but I knew it wasn't over. It had let me go just like before. It was playing with me, and it wasn't finished yet. When the creature disappeared into the forest, it left me standing there on top of the ridge, battered and shaking, unsure if I was really still alive or in the throes of some twisted nightmare. My body ached in places I didn't know could hurt. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the knife. The wind howled through the trees, cold and biting, reminding me that I wasn't safe, not yet. I could still smell that thing, its rancid odor of wet fur and decay clinging to the air, and I knew it was out there somewhere, watching, waiting. This wasn't over. I had to get out of these woods. Now. I forced myself to move, stumbling down the other side of the ridge, half running, half falling through the darkness. Every step felt wrong, like the ground beneath me was shifting, trying to trap me here forever. My vision blurred with exhaustion, the darkness warping into strange shapes, but I kept going, knowing that stopping now would mean death. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together a plan, but everything felt like a blur. I needed to find the trail, find a way back to civilization. I needed help, but who would believe me? No one had believed me before, not when I'd seen strange things out here on past hikes, and certainly not when I had shared old legends of Bigfoot around campfires. Everyone treated it like a joke. Now I was living the nightmare, and I had nothing, no proof, no explanation, just the memory of those glowing eyes and the sound of my own screams. As I stumbled through the dark, I caught sight of something familiar. The forest ahead was thinning, the trees giving way to a small clearing, and beyond it, a faint light flickered, artificial, human. My heart leaped in my chest. I recognized the spot. The ranger station was nearby. I was close. My legs moved faster now, driven by a surge of desperate hope. The ground flattened out, and the trees parted to reveal the small, rustic building, the ranger station. It stood there like a beacon in the night, its windows glowing with a faint light, a promise of safety. I ran toward it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my feet pounding against the dirt. When I reached the door, I slammed my fist against it, the loud banging echoing through the quiet night. "Help! Please open up." My voice was hoarse, barely more than a croak. There was a pause, then the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with graying hair and a heavy flannel jacket. His eyes widened when he saw me, clearly startled by my disheveled, bloodied appearance. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked, stepping back and motioning for me to come inside. I staggered through the door, collapsing into a chair near the small wood stove. The warmth hit me all at once, a sharp contrast to the biting cold outside. But I was shaking too hard to appreciate it. There's something out there," I gasped, clutching my side where the creature had grazed me. It's not human. It's huge. It attacked me. I barely got away." The ranger's brow furrowed, his face etched with concern. "Take it easy, son. You're not making much sense. Are you hurt? You've got blood all over you." I glanced down at myself, my clothes ripped and stained with dirt and blood. It wasn't the worst I'd been, but the adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain was setting in. "I'm fine. No, I'm not fine, but I'll live. Just listen to me. There's something out there. A creature. Big. It's like, I don't know how to describe it. Like Bigfoot. But, the moment the word left my mouth, I saw the flicker of doubt cross his face. "Bigfoot?" he asked, his voice incredulous. He let out a breath, shaking his head. "Look, I've been patrolling these woods for over 20 years, and I've heard all kinds of crazy stories, but nothing like that has ever been confirmed. I'm telling the truth." I shot back, louder than I intended. "It's not just a story. I saw it. It came after me. Look at these." I turned, showing him the deep scratches on my neck and arms. "These aren't from a bear. It was something else." "Something," I trailed off, the words dying in my throat as I realized how insane I sounded. The ranger sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Okay, let's slow down for a second. You're in shock. Whatever you saw, it scared the hell out of you, and it's making it hard for you to think straight. Could have been a bear, like you said. They're all over these parts, and they can get pretty aggressive if you get too close to their territory. It wasn't a bear," I insisted, my voice breaking. "I've seen bears before. This thing was different. It's smart. It's been stalking me for hours, maybe longer. It's playing with me." The ranger's face softened, but the doubt was still there, buried beneath his concern. He walked over to the small radio on the desk, his fingers hovering over the dial. "Let me call it in. We'll get a search party out here, see if we can find any sign of what attacked you. In the meantime, we'll clean up those cuts, and you can get some rest." I wanted to scream, to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until he understood that there was no time. But the exhaustion weighed me down like a lead blanket. He wasn't going to believe me. No one was. Not until it was too late. I slumped back in the chair, defeated. "You don't believe me, do you?" The ranger paused, his hand still on the radio. He gave me a long, measured look, his mouth tight. "It's not that I don't believe you," he said slowly. "But I've seen people out here before who thought they saw something unnatural. Sometimes it's the isolation, the darkness, the fear. It messes with your head. Makes you see things that aren't there." I shook my head. "I'm not crazy. I _no_ what I saw." He didn't respond, just turned back to the radio and started speaking into it, his voice calm and professional, calling in for backup. I stared at the floor, my mind racing. I knew it was still out there. The creature wasn't finished with me. It had let me go, but only because it wanted to. It was playing a game, and it was only a matter of time before it found me again. I glanced out the window, into the darkness beyond the station. For a moment, I swore I saw movement, something large and shadowy slipping between the trees. The ranger looked up from the radio, noticing my silence. "You all right?" I didn't answer. I wasn't all right. I wasn't sure I'd ever be all right again. "It's still out there," I whispered, more to myself than to him. The ranger frowned, but didn't argue. I turned back to the window, my eyes searching the dark forest beyond. The night stretched out endlessly, and somewhere out there, I knew it was waiting. Days had passed since I stumbled out of those woods, battered, bleeding, and terrified beyond belief, but the fear hadn't left me. It lingered, clinging to my skin like the grime from the forest, a weight pressing down on my chest every time I closed my eyes. The world around me felt unreal, too bright, too loud, and every corner seemed to hide something dark, something waiting. No one believed me. Not the ranger, not my friends, not even my own family. The ranger had called in a search team that night after I collapsed into the station, but they found nothing. No tracks, no sign of the creature. The shredded tent, the broken gear, even the blood staining my clothes, all chalked up to an overactive imagination and a fall down a rocky trail. They said the wounds on my neck were from branches and rocks, that the terror I had felt was just my mind playing tricks on me after I'd been lost for so long. They hadn't seen it. They hadn't felt its breath on their neck. They hadn't heard the growl deep in the woods, the one that had shaken me to my core. I'd never forget the sound, not even if I lived 100 more years. My hands shook as I sat at the kitchen table, staring down into a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The house was silent, the ticking of the clock on the wall the only sound. The same questions circled endlessly in my mind, over and over. Underscore, why hadn't it killed me? Underscore, why had it let me go? And the worst question of all, underscore, was it still out there? Underscore, I hadn't slept more than a few hours at a time since that night. Every time I drifted off, I'd see those glowing eyes watching me from the shadows, hear the crack of branches as it moved closer, feel the hot, rancid breath on the back of my neck. And every time, I woke up in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced I could hear footsteps just outside the window. I looked up when I heard a knock at the front door. It startled me, and for a moment, I thought I could hear the forest sounds again, the wind through the trees, the distant snap of twigs, but I quickly shook it off. Underscore, get a grip, Jason. Underscore, I walked to the door and opened it to find my sister, Lisa, standing on the porch. She was wearing a concerned look, the same look she'd been wearing since I came back from that hellish trip. "You look terrible," she said, frowning as she stepped inside. "When's the last time you slept?" I shrugged, closing the door behind her. "Couple of hours last night. I've been busy." Lisa gave me a skeptical look, but she didn't push. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't believe the story I had told her. She thought it was trauma, some sort of breakdown caused by the isolation in the woods. I had seen it in her eyes every time I tried to explain what happened. She wanted to believe me, she wanted to help, but how could she? She hadn't been there. "No one's heard from you for days," she said, setting a bag of groceries on the counter. "Mom's been worried sick. I thought I'd stop by, make sure you were eating something." I managed a weak smile. "I appreciate it." She eyed me for a moment, then sighed. "Jason, I think you need to talk to someone. A professional, I mean. Whatever you went through out there, it's still with you. It's not healthy." I clenched my jaw, feeling a wave of frustration rise in my chest. "I don't need to talk to anyone. What I need is for someone to believe me. This thing, it wasn't in my head. It was real, Lisa." She pursed her lips, clearly trying to be patient, but I could see the doubt flickering in her eyes. "I believe that underscore you underscore believe it," she said gently. "But the search team didn't find anything. No tracks, no signs of an animal that size. If something like that was out there, don't you think they'd have found evidence?" I shook my head, turning away from her. "It's too smart for that. It knows how to stay hidden. You didn't see the way it moved, how it hunted me. It was playing with me, Lisa. It's still out there, and it's only a matter of time before someone else runs into it." She didn't say anything for a long time, and I knew she didn't believe me. No one did. To them, it was just a wild story from a guy who got lost in the woods and scared himself half to death. Maybe they thought it was a bear, or that I had hit my head and imagined the whole thing. But I knew the truth. Lisa finally broke the silence. "Maybe getting back to normal will help. Get some sleep, eat some real food, go back to work. It might take time, but you'll start to feel like yourself again." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her and shake her, to make her understand that none of this was ever going to be normal again. I wasn't going to feel like myself again. I wasn't ever going to walk into a forest without wondering if it was waiting for me. Instead, I just nodded. "Yeah, maybe." She smiled sadly, giving me a hug. "I'm going to check in on you tomorrow, okay? We're going to get you through this." I watched her go, the door clicking shut behind her. The house felt even quieter after she left, the ticking clock now deafening in the empty room. I sat back down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. The words echoed in my mind. We're going to get you through this, but how could they get me through something they didn't even believe? I turned my gaze to the window, where the sunlight streamed in, casting long shadows across the floor. For a moment, I could almost convince myself that everything was normal, that the worst was behind me, that I had escaped. But as the sun dipped lower, casting the room into twilight, the shadows grew longer, and I could feel the weight of the forest pressing in on me again. The quiet was too thick, too still, like the silence right before a storm. In the fading light, I swore I heard it, the faintest sound of a branch snapping just outside. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat there listening, waiting. It was still out there, and I knew deep down it always would be.